Imagine someone hands you a simple glass of water.
Yeah.
You're thirsty, you take it, and you're just about to take a sip. But before the glass even touches your lips, you're told that you have this, like, profound binding spiritual obligation
An obligation to do what exactly?
to ensure that the stream this water came from and the cup holding it are kept in a state of utter, absolute perfection.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You're told that if you had the power to make that cup or that stream cleaner and you just, failed to do so, the water itself, down to its very atoms, would silently protest against you.
I mean, that is an incredibly vivid image.
Right.
It completely upends how most people think about religion or spirituality.
Mhm.
It moves faith out of the realm of abstract belief and injects it directly into the physical environment.
And the craziest part, this wasn't some modern environmentalist speaking in 2024.
No,
This was a 25-year-old prisoner in 1840s Persia. We're talking about a mild-mannered merchant named Syed Ali Muhammad.
just a merchant.
Exactly. The year is 1844. The city is Shiraz. He has absolutely no formal theological training. He isn't part of the clerical elite.
Right.
And yet, from a quiet room, he makes a claim that absolutely sends shockwaves through the entire Islamic world. He takes the title of the Bab, which translates to the Gate.
Big hate, yes.
And what starts in that little room eventually becomes a global movement and later an independent world religion.
And, the reaction to this young man was, well, it was nothing short of explosive.
Yeah.
When we look back at historical paradigm shifts, we usually see them building really slowly. But the Babi movement swept across Persia with staggering speed.
It was incredibly fast.
It drew this ecstatic devotion from thousands of followers.
Right.
But on the flip side, it also triggered a campaign of brutal, systematic violence from the government and the clerical hierarchy.
Right. They did not take it well.
Not at all. And that persecution culminated in the Bab being executed by a firing squad in a public square just 6 years after he began his mission.
Just 6 years. It's wild. So today's deep dive is an exhaustive exploration of exactly what was in those writings that made them so incredibly dangerous to the status quo.
And yet so magnetically powerful to his followers.
Exactly. Now, if you're listening to this right now, you might be wondering how a book written in a 19th century Persian prison has literally anything to do with your life today.
A fair question.
But we are going to answer that. We have an incredible source for this Journey Nader Sayedi's landmark book, Gate of the Heart, Understanding the Writings of the Bab.
It's a fantastic text.
Our mission here is to go way beyond just the literal history. We are plunging into the vast, highly complex ocean of the Bab's writings. We're going to explore all parts, chapters, and sections of the source material to decode his revolutionary metaphysics, his laws, and his absolutely mind-bending historical consciousness.
I love that.
Yeah, but-
But to even begin to understand the magnitude of his claim, we really have to look closely at the historical powder keg of 19th century Shiite Islam.
Setting the stage.
Right. The environment the Bab stepped into was not calm. The Middle East at this time was buzzing with intense millenarian expectations.
Okay, let's define that for a second, because millenarianism is one of those heavy academic words.
Sure.
We're basically talking about a society that is literally waiting for the end of the world.
That is the core of it, yeah. In Shia Islam, devout believers were awaiting the advent of a holy figure known as the 12th Imam.
Okay.
According to tradition, this imam had not died, but had been in a state of mystical concealment for 1,000 years.
1,000 years.
Yeah. And the prophecy stated that when this hidden imam finally reappeared, he would arise as the Qaim, which translates to he who arises.
And what was he supposed to do when he arose? Like, what was the expectation?
Oh, the expectations were entirely apocalyptic. He was expected to unleash a holy war, vanquish all forces of evil, resurrect the dead, and usher in the final day of judgment.
That's a tall order.
It was. The tension was at an absolute boiling point. People were literally scanning the horizon, calculating dates, just waiting for the sky to crack open.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. I mean, if you have an entire society waiting for the end of the world for 1,000 years, somebody has to manage the day-to-day operations in the meantime.
You've hit on the exact reason why the Bab was seen as such a massive threat.
Right.
The clerical establishment, the ulama, had spent centuries building their entire power structure around managing this waiting period.
They were in charge.
Yes, they were the self-appointed guardians of the tradition. They were the gatekeepers of wealth, law, and social order, while the imam was hidden.
So when a 25-year-old merchant stands up in 1844 and says, "Hi, I am the promised Quran," He isn't just making a spiritual claim.
Not at all.
He is basically telling the clerics that their 1,000-year lease is up.
It is a direct, existential threat to their authority. But the Bab didn't stop there. And this is where he breaks completely from the expected script.
Oh.
He claimed to not only be the promised Quaim, but also a brand new independent prophet with a new book and new laws.
Which was completely unheard of.
Completely. And beyond even that, he claimed to merely be the herald of an even greater messianic figure yet to come. A figure he referred to as he whom God shall make manifest.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where the mystery really takes hold.
It really does.
How does a young man with no classical training produce thousands of pages of complex, deeply symbolic text that completely upends a rigid 1,000-year-old clerical establishment?
It's the central question.
To answer that, we have to look at the massive cultural deadlock happening at that exact moment in history, which Saidi outlines beautifully in our source. Before we even dive into the Bab's texts themselves, we have to understand the existential crisis facing the Islamic world.
Right, because the 19th century was a period of profound trauma for the Middle East.
Yeah, trauma is the right word.
They were facing the rapid, overwhelming technological, economic, and military rise of the West. For centuries, the Islamic world had seen itself as the absolute pinnacle of civilization.
And suddenly,
modernity is knocking at the door with steam engines and advanced weaponry, and the traditionalist clerics reacted the way threatened institutions almost always do.
they built a fortress. They doubled down on the old ways.
They walled themselves off completely. Saidi explains that the traditionalist stance was rooted in a very specific, static thesis of finality.
Meaning nothing can change.
Exactly. They believed that the Word of God, and therefore all religious law, social practice, and their understanding of the universe was eternal, unalterable, and completely final. Islam was the final religion. The Quran was the final book.
So, if you're a cleric with that worldview and you see the Islamic world falling behind the West militarily and technologically, you can't blame the theology.
No, you can't.
Your only explanation is that Muslims have strayed from the rituals of the past.
And their solution was a rigid, uncompromising fundamentalism. They demanded a rejection of everything modern, a fierce clinging to past rituals, and they treated religion as an entirely closed system.
Right.
If it wasn't in the ancient texts, it was an impure innovation that had to be destroyed.
And meanwhile, on the flip side of the globe, you have the Western modernist stance, and they were having their own entirely different kind of crisis.
Absolutely.
The West was rapidly industrializing, they're embracing reason and the scientific method, but in the process, they were essentially abandoning their spiritual foundations.
Right.
Saidi's analysis here gets incredibly sharp. He points out the Bab's implicit critique of what academics call sociological reductionism, or just sociologism.
Let's define that term, because it's vital.
Go for it.
Sociologism is the idea that everything about human behavior, including religion, can be reduced purely to social or material causes.
Okay.
So in the 19th century West, you had thinkers like Karl Marx, who were reducing religion purely to economics, calling it the opiate of the masses, just a tool for class control.
Right. You had Emil Durkheim reducing it to mere social constructs, a way for communities to bond. Later, you'd have Freud reducing it to psychological illusion or neurosis.
So they were essentially saying that the spiritual dimension of reality simply did not exist. Religion was just like a byproduct of human culture, a coping mechanism we invented.
Exactly. And when you put these two worldviews side by side, you see the ultimate cultural trap.
It's a lose-lose situation.
It is. Fundamentalism ignores the social and historical reality of humanity. It essentially says God spoke once, the rules are frozen in stone, and it never changes, regardless of what era you live in.
And sociologism ignores the spiritual and transcendent reality. It says God is just a human invention shaped by whatever society happens to exist at the time.
Right.
Both of these extremes create this terrifying trap of cultural relativism and conflict. Think about it. If your religion is absolute, static, and frozen, then everyone who disagrees with you is an infidel who must be conquered.
But if your religion is just a cultural artifact, then there's no universal moral truth at all. Everything is just power dynamics.
Both sides are fundamentally flawed because they deny the multidimensional character of reality. And this is exactly where the Bab introduces a radically new third path.
This is the breakthrough.
The texts we are exploring today introduce a dynamic, progressive view of truth. In the Bab's theology, religion is not a static object. It is a continuous living interaction between the eternal divine will and the specific, constantly changing historical conditions of humanity.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this while reading Saidi's notes. It feels like fundamentalism treats religion like a stone monument.
Okay, a stone monument.
Yeah, like you can't alter a single carving. You just have to preserve it and protect it from the weather.
Huh.
And sociology treats it like a purely human invention, like a hammer we made up to build a house.
Right.
But the Bab is saying it's more like a living organism that evolves. Or, to put it in a modern context, is like an operating system on your phone.
Oh, I like where you're going with that.
Yeah.
How does the operating system analogy map onto the Bab's theology?
Well, the fundamentalists basically thought humanity was running on iOS 1, and it was the final, perfect software.
Right. No updates allowed.
Exactly. It could never, ever be updated. And if your new apps like modern science or industry didn't work on it, well, you throw away the apps.
Sure.
Sociology, on the other hand, says there is no developer. We just randomly generated the code ourselves. But the Bab comes along and says, no, there is a divine developer. And that developer is always going to push new updates because the hardware humanity itself keeps evolving and getting more complex.
That captures the essence of it beautifully.
Yeah.
A living organism, or a dynamic operating system, retains its core identity, its fundamental purpose, but it constantly sheds old code, grows, and adapts to its new environment.
Exactly.
The Bab argued that the creative spirit of religion actually requires the abrogation of previous social laws and their periodic renewal. The divine truth is absolute in its origin, but its expression is always relative to human capacity.
Which completely bypasses the whole clash of civilizations narrative.
It really does.
Because if religion is an evolving organism, the Bab can turn to his followers and say, embrace the useful elements of Western modernity, learn from their sciences, adopt their industry, while simultaneously rejecting the blind, soulless materialism of the West.
Right.
He's taking the best of both worlds and discarding the rigid dogmas of both.
It was a foundational re-examination of what religious identity even means. But, to communicate a paradigm shift this massive to an audience deeply entrenched in 19th century fundamentalism, the Bab couldn't just write a modern philosophical essay.
No, they would have just burned it.
Exactly. He had to use a highly unique mode of expression. Over the course of his incredibly brief 7-year ministry, his writings evolved through 3 distinct stages to gradually unveil this new reality.
The psychology of a staged rollout is fascinating to me. He doesn't just drop his most radical laws on day one.
That would have been disastrous.
Right. Let's track that chronology because the sheer volume of what he produced in 7 years, much of it while imprisoned in remote mountain fortresses, is staggering. We're talking about 3 main stages.
Yes.
Stage 1 is the interpretive stage. This goes from his initial declaration in May 1844 up to early 1846. Here, he's heavily focused on interpreting the Quran. He's not writing completely new books of law yet. He's unveiling hidden inner meanings in the texts people already revere.
That gradual approach is crucial. If he had proclaimed the abrogation of Islamic law on day 1, the cognitive dissonance would have been way too great for anyone to accept.
Right, they just dismiss him entirely.
He had to first prove his supreme mastery over their existing sacred texts.
Makes total sense. Then you have stage 2, the philosophical stage, which runs up to July 1847. This is where he starts elaborating on the actual metaphysics of being, how the universe is structured, how God interacts with creation.
Yes, the deeper mechanics.
And finally, stage 3, the legislative stage, from July 1847 until his execution in July 1850. This is the period of his imprisonment in Makhu and Shirik, where he openly proclaims his station as a new independent prophet and lays down entirely new laws, officially breaking from Islam.
To understand that first stage, the interpretive one, we have to look at what Saidi calls the Bab's hermeneutics of unity.
Okay, let's pause and define hermeneutics for the listener. It sounds intimidating, but it's basically just the lens or the method you use to interpret a text, right?
Correct. It's the framework of interpretation. When the traditional clerics interpreted a holy text, they read it primarily as literal history or a strict legal manual.
Very dry.
Very literal. When the Bab interprets a holy text, he spiritualizes it. His hermeneutics are based on one core principle. All phenomena, everything in existence, points to a single supreme origin and end.
Wow.
He views the entire universe and every single word in the sacred texts as a mirror reflecting the divine.
And he uses these incredibly rich, almost alchemical symbols to explain this. I was reading the section in our source where he takes the classical 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth.
Right.
Now, in the 19th century, people still thought of these in somewhat literal terms, but the Bab doesn't treat them as physical science. He uses them as a symbolic map of the divine covenant.
He takes what was considered natural philosophy and elevates it to spiritual theology. The Bab breaks down human reality and the divine covenant into 4 corresponding layers.
Okay, lay them out for us.
At the absolute highest level, you have the point, which corresponds to the heart and the element of fire. This is the ultimate pure divine revelation, the spark of absolute truth.
So fire is the point, the heart. What's next?
Below that is the spirit, which corresponds to the element of air. This represents the moment of inclination or determination, the invisible breath of life that carries the heat of the fire.
Okay, air is spirit.
Then comes the soul, corresponding to water. Water represents reception, taking the shape of its container, symbolizing destiny and the absorption of the spirit.
And the last one.
And finally, the lowest level is the body, corresponding to earth or dust, which is the physical manifestation, the solid ground of action.
So he's basically saying that everything in existence has this layered structure.
Yes.
A human being has a physical body, which is earth, a receptive soul, which is water, an animating spirit, which is air, and at the very center, a divine spark or heart, which is fire. And he applies this exact same structure to the prophets and the texts themselves.
Exactly. And the most dramatic and sweeping application of this interpretive method is his very first major work, the Qayyum al-Azma.
Yeah.
This is his massive commentary on the Quranic Surah of Joseph.
This book is legendary in the history of the movement. Let's set the scene for this because it's so dramatic.
It really is.
It's the night of May 26, 1844. A young religious scholar named Mullah Hussein has been searching the country for the promised Qayyim. He comes to Shiraz, meets the Bab, and over the course of the night, the Bab answers all of his theological test questions and declares his mission. And to prove his authority, the Bab starts writing this massive commentary right then and there.
He writes the first chapter in the presence of Mullah Hussein, writing with blinding speed without pausing to think or reference any other books.
Just off the top of his head.
Yes, and he completes the entire massive volume in just 40 days.
The mathematical structure of this book alone is mind-blowing. Our source details how the book has exactly 111 chapters.
111?
Why 111? Well, first, that matches the exact number of verses in the original Surah of Joseph in the Quran, but it goes so much deeper than that because of the Abjad system.
We should probably explain the Abjad system for those who aren't familiar with it.
Please do, because it comes up constantly in the Bab's writings. It's like a secret numerical code built into the language itself.
It is an ancient Arabic system where every letter of the alphabet is assigned a specific mathematical value.
Okay.
So A might be 1, B might be 2, and so on. This means that every word doesn't just have a semantic meaning. It has a numerical value calculated by adding up its letters. In the Abjad system, the numerical value of the name Joseph is exactly 111.
Wow.
Furthermore, the Bab used titles like the Exalted or Al-Ali, which also has numerical significance tying back to his own name, Ali Muhammad.
So the 111 chapters aren't a coincidence. He is mathematically weaving his own identity into the structure of the commentary.
Precisely.
But it's what he actually does with the story of Joseph that is so revolutionary. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, the basic biblical and Quranic story of Joseph is about a young boy who has a prophetic dream.
Right.
His older brothers get insanely jealous. They throw him into a dark well and leave him for dead. But he is rescued, taken to Egypt, and eventually rises to become a powerful ruler.
The classic underdog story.
Yeah. And years later, his brothers come to Egypt during a famine and have to bow down to the very brother they betrayed.
Now, traditional Islamic scholars read this Surah as a beautiful but static historical narrative about a past prophet, a lesson in patience and divine providence. But the Bab completely flips the paradigm. He turns the historical story into a prophetic one. In his interpretation, the story of Joseph is actually a spiritual allegory for the Bab himself and the unfolding of his new revelation.
He casts himself as the Joseph of a new era. So when Joseph gets thrown into the dark well by his jealous brothers, the Bab says, this isn't just about a guy in a physical well thousands of years ago.
Right.
What does the well symbolize in the Bab's framework?
The well symbolizes the Bab being submerged in what he calls the Sea of Absolute Unity.
The Sea of Absolute Unity.
Yes, it is a state of pure mystic concealment, the period before he declares his mission to the world, where he is alone with the divine.
Okay.
And when Joseph is pulled out of the well and taken to Egypt, that represents the Bab emerging from concealment. Egypt becomes the symbol for the world of humanity receiving his revelation.
And the brothers. This is the part that gave me chills when I was reading Saidi's analysis. Joseph's brothers, who originally betray him but eventually come seeking sustenance, are interpreted by the Bab as his own first followers.
Specifically, a group known as the Letters of the Living.
Right. The Letters of the Living were the Bab's first 18 disciples. Mullah Hussein was the very first one. And here's where it gets really interesting conceptually.
Okay.
If the Bab is writing a commentary about the future, he is actually creating the reality he's interpreting in real time.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the people reading this text, like Mullah Hussein and the other 17 disciples who find him in those early weeks, they are literally reading about themselves.
It's a profound observation. The text is not just passively predicting the future. It is the catalyst that forces the future into existence.
It's like he's handing his followers a script and saying, you are already in this play. You are the brothers of Joseph. Now read your lines and step onto the stage.
And it worked.
Yeah, they read this book, they recognized the sheer, overwhelming authority in it, and they immediately scattered across the country to spread the word.
This raises a critical point about the power of language in the Bab's framework. The Word of God is not just information. It is a living, creative force.
Where?
By reading the Qayyumul Asma, the followers are being transformed into the spiritual reality the text describes. He is taking an archaic, revered text and using it to spiritually engineer a brand new community in the present tense.
It's brilliant.
It is an incredibly sophisticated use of intertextuality and prophetic fulfillment.
But as his ministry progresses from this first interpretive stage into the second stage, the philosophical stage, he shifts gears.
He does.
He moves from interpreting old texts to explaining the actual underlying mechanics of how the universe works. He starts detailing his core theological engine, the concept of the primal will.
To truly grasp the primal will, we first have to take a step back and understand the Bab's epistemology.
Let's define epistemology for our listeners. It's essentially the philosophical study of how we know what we know. How do we arrive at truth?
Exactly. The Bab heavily critiques the traditional philosophers and theologians of his day. These scholars believed that human reason and the intellect alone could deduce universal truth and understand God.
But the Bab disagreed.
Completely. The Bab argues that the human intellect is fundamentally limited by its own nature.
Why is the intellect flawed in his view?
Because the intellect operates entirely in the realm of dualities and distinctions. It understands things by contrasting them, light versus dark, up versus down, subject versus object.
Right.
The intellect looks at a clay pot and sees the clay as separate from the potter.
Yeah.
Because God is absolute infinite unity, the dualistic intellect can never actually comprehend him.
So what's the alternative?
To truly understand reality, the Bab says one must transcend the intellect and reach what he calls the sanctuary of the heart.
The sanctuary of the heart. It sounds beautiful and poetic, but Saidi makes it clear that the Bab means something highly specific and rigorous by it.
He does. The sanctuary of the heart is a perspective of absolute unity. It is a state of spiritual perception where you look at the diverse, fragmented, conflicting world and you see the single unifying light of the divine will reflecting in everything.
Oh, wow.
You stop seeing just the clay and you start seeing the potter's intent radiating from within the clay.
So when he talks about the primal will, which he often calls the point, tying back to the element of fire we discussed earlier, he's talking about the very first emanation from God. It's the absolute center of reality. God himself is unknowable, but the primal will is the interface. And Saidi points out a duality here that I literally needed to read 3 times to fully grasp. The point has a dual station.
The Bab lays out the analytics of the point with incredible precision. The point, which is the manifestation of God, the prophet, has 2 distinct aspects that exist simultaneously.
Okay.
The first is the station of divinity. In this station, the manifestation is speaking purely on behalf of God. He is a perfect, flawless reflection of the divine light. When he speaks, it is God speaking.
And the second station.
The second is the station of servitude. In this station, the manifestation acknowledges his utter, complete powerlessness, his absolute nothingness before the unknowable essence of God.
I was trying to visualize this. It's like a mirror reflecting the sun.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you look directly at the mirror when the sun is hitting it, the light is blinding. The mirror can legitimately say, I am the sun, because the light radiating from it is identical to the sun's light.
Right.
That is the station of divinity. But simultaneously, the mirror can say, I am just a piece of physical glass. I generate absolutely no light of my own. I am nothing without the sun. That is the station of servitude. Both statements are 100% true at the exact same time.
That is the perfect analogy, and it solves a massive theological problem.
How so?
The Bab asserts that traditional theology often fractured and failed because scholars couldn't hold both of those truths at once.
Ah.
People either elevated the prophets to the status of the unknowable essence of God himself, which leads to pantheism or polytheism, or they degraded them to mere ordinary men, stripping them of their divine authority.
Right, they forced a choice.
Exactly. The sanctuary of the heart allows you to see the mirror and the sun perfectly united without confusing the two.
And from this primal will, this point, the Bab maps out how the entire universe is created. He doesn't believe the universe just pops into existence instantly like a magic trick.
No.
He says creation filters down through 7 sequential stages of divine creative action. I'm looking at the list in the source material. I need your help walking through these because they are dense.
They are.
The 7 stages are will, determination, destiny, decree, permission, term, and book.
Let's break them down because they are foundational to his worldview. Let's use the analogy of an architect building a house.
I love that. Let's do it.
The first stage is will. This is the initial spark, the pure divine intention to create. In our analogy, it's the moment the architect decides, I am going to build a house. It is pure potential.
Okay, stage 2 is determination.
Determination is the conceptualization. The architect sits down and sketches out the general idea. Will the house be modern? Will it be Victorian? The raw intention is starting to take specific shape in the mind.
Stage 3 is destiny. And Saidi highlights this as the absolute most pivotal stage in the Bab's entire philosophy. Why is destiny so crucial?
Because destiny is the nexus point where the pure divine will intersects with the actual limited capacity of the material world.
The blueprint phase.
Exactly. The architect has to look at the actual plot of land, the budget, the laws of physics, and draw precise measurements. The infinite idea has to intersect with finite reality. Destiny is where the spiritual realm meets the phenomenal realm. It sets the exact capacities and limitations of the created thing.
That makes so much sense. Okay, stage 4 is decree.
Decree is the finalization of the plan. The blueprints are stamped and approved. It is the definitive command that this specific structure will be built exactly this way.
Stage 5 is permission.
Permission is the active deployment of energy. The permits are pulled, the workers are on the site, the ground is broken, the conceptual is finally crossing over into physical action.
Stage 6 is term.
Term is the timeline. Every created thing has a specific duration, a lifespan. The house will take exactly 6 months to build, and it will stand for exactly 100 years before it needs to be replaced. It is the parameter of time.
And finally, stage 7 is book.
The book is the finished reality. The house is built. It is a physical, observable fact in the world. It is the complete manifestation of the original will.
That analogy helps immensely. So the Bab is basically saying that every single atom in the universe, every historical event, and every new religion goes through this exact 7-stage process.
Precisely.
The divine will filters down until it becomes a physical reality.
A book. And he makes this highly abstract philosophy accessible in one of his most important works from this period, the Epistle of Justice, or the Sehifiya Idliya.
What's amazing about the Epistle of Justice is the language he chose to write it in. Before this book, the Bab wrote mostly in Arabic, which was the traditional language of Islamic theology. The clerics used Arabic to maintain their monopoly on knowledge. The common Persian person couldn't read it. But the Bab writes the Epistle of Justice in Persian.
That language shift is a profound political and social statement. By switching to Persian, he is bypassing the clerical elite entirely.
He's going straight to the people.
Exactly. He is taking these massive theological secrets and handing them directly to the masses. He is democratizing spiritual knowledge.
And just like we saw with the commentary on Joseph, the physical form of the Epistle of Justice mirrors its spiritual content. Saidi notes that the book is structured into exactly 5 chapters.
5 chapters.
Why 5? Because going back to the Abjad numerical system, 5 is the numerical value of the Arabic letter ha. And the letter ha is mathematically equivalent to the word Bab.
He is structurally telling the reader that the book itself is an embodiment of the gate. The text is the entrance to divine truth.
And what he does inside those 5 chapters is radical. He completely redefines what it means to be a believer.
He does.
Traditionally, Muslims had these static root principles, the fundamental pillars of the faith. You have the belief in the oneness of God, the prophets, the day of judgment, prayer, fasting, and so on. But the Bab shifts the entire foundation. He says the ultimate root principle isn't a static list of beliefs or rituals.
He argues that the ultimate root principle is the recognition of the divine will as it changes through history.
Let's pause on that because it's a massive paradigm shift. Contrast the old pillars with this new principle. How does shifting from a static rulebook to recognizing the manifestation of God change the daily psychological reality of a believer?
Well, think about the mindset of a traditionalist. Your focus is entirely on preserving the past. You measure your righteousness by how perfectly you mimic the actions of people who lived 1,000 years ago.
Right, your religion is an archaeological dig.
That's a great way to put it. But if your root principle is recognizing the dynamic, unfolding will of God in the present moment, your focus shifts to the future. You are constantly looking for the next update, the next level of refinement.
You stop worshiping the clay and start paying attention to the potter.
Yes. The Bob says the ultimate balance, the standard for justice and truth, is not an old book. The balance is the manifestation of God for that specific age.
Wow.
He dismantles the idea that you can judge a new prophet by the standards of the old one. If humanity's capacity evolves, if our hardware upgrades, using your earlier analogy, God's will manifests in a new form to match it.
Right.
Therefore, what was a crucial root principle in one era might just be a derivative secondary principle in the next. The only eternal root principle is recognizing the current mirror reflecting the sun.
Which perfectly sets up the transition into his third and final stage, the legislative stage, and his ultimate masterpiece, the Persian Bayan.
The Bayan, yes.
If the divine will creates reality in stages and human capacity is always evolving, how does that actually play out in the grand sweep of human history?
This is where the Bab's historical consciousness becomes fully unveiled. He introduces a concept called Bada, which translates roughly to alteration.
Alteration of what?
Alteration of destiny. Traditional Islamic theology, heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, often leaned toward predestination. They believed that God's plan was fixed, final, and unchanging.
Okay.
But the Bab takes that third stage of creation we talked about, destiny, the intersection of the divine and material, and applies it to religious culture itself.
He argues that God's revelation is never final because human evolution is never final.
Exactly. Bada is the idea that God's plan is dynamic. It is an ongoing interaction with humanity's evolving capacity. Because human spiritual and social evolution has no end, divine revelation can have no end.
Goodbye. End of history. Goodbye, static fundamentalism. This completely shatters the idea that any religion can claim to be the final chapter of the book.
And by shattering that, he completely revolutionizes the concept of resurrection. We talked about how the 19th century Middle East was waiting for the Day of Judgment.
Right, the apocalyptic expectations.
They were reading the prophecies literally. They were waiting for graves to literally open and dead bodies to climb out of the dirt.
A literal zombie apocalypse, a Hollywood movie ending to the physical planet.
But the Bab explains that resurrection is not a physical event at the end of the physical world. It is a spiritual awakening at the end of a specific religious era.
Oh, that's fascinating.
The resurrection of one era happens the moment a new manifestation of God appears to inaugurate the next era.
So when the Bab declared his mission in that quiet room in Shiraz in 1844, that was the Day of Judgment for the Islamic dispensation?
Yes.
The dead who were being raised weren't physical corpses. They were the spiritually dead, the people trapped in rigid dogma, being brought to life by the new revelation.
It is a brilliant reinterpretation that keeps the sacredness of the prophecy, but completely removes the catastrophic violence of a literal end-of-the-world scenario.
And he builds his most important book, The Persian Bayan, as the architectural blueprint for this endlessly evolving universe. I was looking at Sayeedi's notes on the structure of the Bayan, and the math is hurting my head.
It's intense.
I need you to explain this to me.
Yeah.
Sayeedi notes that the Bayan was designed to have 19 unities, and each unity has 19 gates or chapters. 19 times 19 equals 361. Why this absolute obsession with the number 19 and 361?
It all ties back to the profound mathematical symbolism we've been discussing. In the Abjad system, the number 361 is the exact numerical value of the Arabic phrase kulushe.
And what does kulushe mean?
It means all things. It represents the entirety of creation. Furthermore, the Bab actually created a brand new calendar for his followers, a solar calendar consisting of 19 months, with each month having 19 days.
Okay.
19 times 19 is 361 days. Add a few intercalary days, and you have a full solar year.
So wait, he structured the chapters of his book to perfectly mirror the days of the calendar year.
Yes, the Bayan is a structural microcosm of time and space.
That is wild. He literally structured his book to be a fractal map of reality. Every chapter corresponds to a day of the year.
Exactly.
And since he called himself the Bab, the gate, Every day is meant to be a gate leading to the recognition of the next promised one. He's telling his followers, don't just read this text as a manual of rules. Live inside it. Let the passage of time itself remind you that the universe is constantly unfolding.
And that formal structure heavily dictates the ethics and laws he introduces in this final stage of his life. The deep dive we are doing today culminates right here in the practical application of this massive theological framework.
The practical stuff.
Right. How did the Bab actually want his followers to live their daily lives in this 361-degree fractal universe?
Which brings us back to the image we started the show with, the glass of water.
Yes.
In the Bayan, the Bab gives his followers what Saidi calls the mandate of refinement and perfection. This is honestly one of the most beautiful and mind-bending laws I've ever encountered in a religious text.
It is entirely unique.
The law states that if you build something, if you craft an object, you are spiritually commanded to build it to the absolute utmost state of perfection possible.
Right.
It's not just about aesthetics or making things look pretty. It is a profound spiritual duty. Why? Because the Bab says that every single atom of that object yearns for perfection, yearns to reflect the divine will. And if you have the power to make it perfect and you fail due to laziness or apathy, the object itself will silently protest against you.
And he applies this to the environment as well. He gives a specific example of the glass of water. He writes that if a believer is handed a glass of water and they become aware that the water passed through an impure or dirty stream on its way to them, they would be deeply grieved.
Yeah.
Therefore, it implicitly becomes the strict duty of the community to ensure that all streams, lakes, and physical environments are kept perfectly clean.
It is a mandate to spiritualize the physical world, and this connects directly back to our discussion about the cultural deadlock between the East and the West.
How so?
This law of perfection is exactly why the Bab, sitting in a remote, freezing Persian prison, explicitly praised European industry and sciences.
He urged his followers to learn from the West. He totally defied the xenophobia of the traditional clerics, who thought anything produced by a non-Muslim was inherently impure and had to be shunned.
The Bab is looking at a steam engine or a telegraph and saying, if they have perfected a science or a craft, that perfection is a reflection of the divine. I don't care where it came from. Learn it, adopt it, use it to build a better world.
Exactly.
He embraces the technological progress of modernity while grounding it in a deep spiritual reverence for nature and creation.
But he is very careful to temper that intense drive for physical and technological perfection with an absolute mandate of ethical compassion. One of the primary cornerstones of Babi ethics is the strict prohibition of causing grief.
Do not cause sadness to anyone. It sounds almost too simple, like a platitude on a greeting card, but he elevates it to the highest possible law of human interaction.
He maps this prohibition onto his profound focus on love and pure motives. The Bab argued that true spiritual action must be done purely for the love of God.
Okay.
If you do good deeds because you are terrified of the fire of hell, or because you desire the luxurious rewards of heaven, your action is essentially selfish. It is transactional.
It lacks purity.
True worship is an expression of absolute love, a desire to align with the divine will simply because it is beautiful, without any thought of reward or punishment.
So how does causing grief tie into that?
Because every human heart is a mirror capable of reflecting God. If you cause unnecessary grief or sadness to another human being, you are tarnishing that mirror. You are disrupting the fundamental unity of creation. Violating a human heart is treated as a severe spiritual offense.
Which brings us to the ultimate twist of this entire deep dive, and honestly the part of Saidi's book that shocked me the most, the law of the sword, or jihad.
This is the central paradox of the Babi movement.
Right. Early on, we talked about how the Middle East was waiting for the Qayyim to unleash an apocalyptic holy war. The Bab claims to be the Qayyim, so his early followers, acting on the messianic prophecies they had been taught their whole lives, gathered with swords.
They did.
They literally marched toward Karbala, fully expecting a massive, bloody battle against the forces of unbelief.
We should provide some context on Karbala. For Shia Muslims, Karbala, located in modern-day Iraq, is one of the holiest sites in the world.
Right.
It is the site where the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Imam Hussein, was martyred in the 7th century. The cultural expectation was that the Qayyim would return to Karbala to avenge that ancient wrong and conquer the world.
So the Bab's followers are marching to Karbala, swords drawn, ready for the apocalypse. And traditional historians often point to this and paint the early Babi movement as a militant, violent uprising.
They do.
But Saidi proves that the textual reality of what the Bab actually commanded his followers to do is entirely different.
He radically subverts the entire concept of holy war from the inside out.
It's a masterful theological trap. He theoretically affirmed the law of jihad in his early writings, because if he didn't, the people wouldn't accept him as the Qaim. He had to fulfill the letter of the prophecy.
He had to check that box.
But, as Saidi points out, he attached completely impossible conditions to it. The chief condition: waging this holy war must not cause any grief or sadness to anyone.
Think about the logical implication of that command. How do you wage a physical war? How do you strike someone with a sword without causing them or their family grief?
It is physically impossible.
Exactly. By setting that ethical condition, the Bab effectively nullified the law of the sword entirely.
So when he saw that his followers gathering in Karbala was going to lead to violence, panic, and persecution, what did he do? Did he command them to attack?
No, he canceled the march. He explicitly altered the divine command to prevent harm. He ordered them to stand down.
He transformed the concept of conquest from a military conquest of territory into a spiritual victory of hearts. The sword became a metaphor for the piercing power of the Word of God. The barricades we picture when we think of revolutions, they weren't in the streets, they were in the mind. He overthrew the old order without ever asking his followers to fire a single shot in aggression.
It is a stunning theological maneuver. He utilized the fierce, eschatological language of his culture to completely disarm its violence. He took the apocalyptic expectation of his time and transmuted it into a mandate for education, artistic refinement, and universal love.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have traveled through a truly vast ocean of thought. Let's recap this monumental journey.
Let's do it.
We started with a 25-year-old merchant in Shiraz, challenging 1,000-year-old dogmas that had frozen an entire civilization in place. We decoded the structural genius of his 40-day commentary on Joseph the Qayyum al-Azma and saw how he used text to create reality in real time. We explored the Epistle of Justice and the 7 stages of the primal will. And we ended with the Persian Bayam, where he took a static, fundamentalist world and introduced a dynamic, endlessly evolving universe. He showed that everything, from the highest emanation of the divine will to the dust on the ground to the water in your glass, is a mirror waiting to be polished.
If there is an ultimate takeaway from Nader Saidi's analysis, it is this. Knowledge and religion are not archaeological relics to be blindly repeated or preserved in amber.
Yeah.
They're living, breathing interactions between human capacity and universal truth. To truly understand reality, whether you live in the 19th century or the 21st century, one must move past the dualistic limitations of the intellect and enter the sanctuary of the heart.
The sanctuary of the heart.
We must view all the diverse, sometimes contradictory elements of our world through the lens of fundamental unity. Truth is never static. It is always calling us to a higher level of refinement.
And that brings us to our final thought. The Bab completely dismantled the idea of an end of history or a final truth. He insisted that the universe is a fractal of gates, and tomorrow will always inevitably demand a new level of spiritual and social evolution.
Always.
He looked at a world obsessed with maintaining the rigid, diagnostic clarity of an X-ray, and he told them the machine itself was an illusion. So looking at your own life, what deeply held final truths or personal traditions are you clinging to today? What beliefs are you treating as unchangeable stone monuments that might actually just be stepping stones waiting for you to outgrow them?